Welcome back to Final Resonance TV and episode number 48 of Van Halen Stories. Today I have an awesome guest, a guy that I've known since I was about a 15-year-old kid watching MTV. From the band Grim Reaper, Nick Bowcott, also from Sweetwater, as you guys probably know today because everybody buys stuff at Sweetwater like I do. And he was also with Jim Marshall for over 20 years and worked with Eddie Van Halen at Charvel and Jackson. And so it's a great pleasure to have you, man. And I've been wanting to get you on for a long time. You've been on my list, so thank you for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure, and thanks for that very kind intro.
Well, you know, I loved new wave of British heavy metal when I was young. I loved the Priest, and I loved Maiden, of course. And I know, you know, that was sort of you're right there in the thick of that.
Yeah, we were a pimple on the backside of those wonderful bands, but we were part of that whole, you know, to be, you know, like Priest was a huge influence on me. Like British Steel was a landmark album for me when it came out in 1980 because alongside the great band Diamond Head, who, you know, had a huge influence on Metallica, those two bands, in my opinion, blazed the path for melodic heavy metal, like 3-minute hooky songs.
Right.
British Steel was that album that really that shaped Grim Reaper to a large extent.
Yeah, British Steel for me was big too. We saw we played in high school. We played, you know, Living After Midnight, Breaking the Law, all that stuff.
And the rest of the album's great too, like the Grinders, You Don't Have to Be Old to Be Wise, yada yada yada. Metal Gods, of course. Yeah, just the Rage, classic stuff, classic Priest.
Yeah, we loved that album. That was one of the ones that was right there along with Grim Reaper, man. And you're right, it was so cool to hear those albums, and that particular time, the early 80s with that was really kind of cool and kind of the foundation.
Right.
So one of the things I want to ask you right out of the gate before we get into the deep part of this is, when did you, I read your piece on Eddie Van Halen that you did in the NSYNC article, and you said you remembered where you were and what was going on when you heard that first album and all the detail. I don't know your story behind that. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, sure. It was a friend of mine. I was in a student hostel in Leeds in 1980. A friend of mine, and I was in the laundry doing laundry. And you got to remember, this was pre-internet. There were no cell phones. So a friend of mine came down, found me, took him about an hour to find me. And when he found me, he's like, "You have to come to my room right now." I'm like, "Well, you got some really good beer." He goes, "No, I've got something better than that. You've got to hear this record." And he had Van Halen 1.
Wow.
And it was, like I said, I remember that specifically. There are certain things, like music to me is not only the international language, but it's also a big part of your memory. There were certain songs and certain albums where you remember the first time you heard them because they had such profound impact on you. And Van Halen 1 was profound and still is to this day.
Sure. It still sounds great. It still sounds amazing. Right.
And if you listen to those isolated tracks, like recently, Rick Beato played it to some of the new wave of like guitar heroes, and it was Eddie's eruption off the drum mics, off Alex's drum mics.
Right.
And it was a one take. You know, it was no freaking Pro Tools, no punch in this, move this. It was just you know, flesh, strings, and passion.
Right. So on that first album, what really, like, if you had to pick two of the songs that just stick out for you, which ones are they?
Well, I don't think there's a bad song on it. You know, I'm a huge fan of Van Halen, period. But for me, the Roth era,
right,
the pre and post were the ones, because, like, to me personally, and I'm a huge Hagar fan, great singer. That Montrose album, that first Montrose album, is another one of those landmark records, in my opinion. Like Rock Candy, Space Station Number 5.
Mm-hmm.
But David brought something out of Eddie and Alex, and you can really hear that in when he rejoined the band to do Me Wise Magic for that Best of Both Worlds album. I hadn't heard Eddie play like that since he left, and that there's a fire there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they play off each other. They do play off each other. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a tension there. There was an excitement to, like, what's he going to do next kind of thing. So On Fire is a big one for me, though.
Yeah, awesome solo.
Yeah, that ascending thing he does. And then, and then what's funny too is if you listen to like the first track on that record is, Running with the Devil, and it's one of none of his solos are easy to play,
Right.
almost impossible to duplicate. But that solo is on the Eddie scale of hardness on the simpler side of things. And but it fitted the song, and that's the thing. I don't think a lot of people get so involved in his technical expertise and his groundbreaking tapping and use of harmonics and the whammy bar. His rhythm playing and his sense of melody were second to none, in my opinion, and that to me was what stood out. Like a great solo in a bad song is a great solo in a bad song.
Right.
An okay solo in a great song, it's still a great song. Then you put Eddie, I mean, his rhythm chops were ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. His swing, as they, like I'm the one, the swing on I'm the one that no one can ever duplicate, not even the Pete Thorns of this world. Pete's the first to say, I can't swing that hard. No
Right.
one can.
Right, right. I totally agree. Yeah, that particular song is really difficult. You're right, and just the isolated tracks when you listen to now. This is something I noticed really when I was listening to that. I'm the one. It's how great Alex's feet are.
Oh yeah, no, it's and there was this symbiotic relationship they had,
Absolutely.
this brotherhood thing, and which is something we'll get more into later, or probably because of the Dime connection.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, there was something about the synergy between those two. It was almost telepathic.
Yeah. For sure. Because when you heard him, you heard Eddie without Alex. You could tell there was a difference. You could definitely feel
Oh
it.
yeah, yeah, definitely, yeah,
You were probably there in the early days with the NAMM shows when he was doing the jams and all that, and
yeah,
you could see the difference and feel the difference in the way it was delivered.
yeah. Well, it was his home. It,
Yeah.
it,
Oh yeah.
it it was his, not his safe place, because it was a dangerous place in a great way. It was
Right.
musical danger for the
Right.
rest of us anyway. But it was his. It was where his heart was, and you could tell it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So we talked for a second about Jim Marshall, and I've always been, like I said to you offline, I'm such a big fan of his. I think everybody in rock was a big fan of his. You mentioned Dimebag and of course, all these other guys that played Marshalls and of course, Eddie's sound. Just talk a little bit about Jim in general. When you started with him, how long ago was that? And then you did 20 years there at Marshall.
Pretty much, yeah. I started. Long story short, I was asked to demonstrate the JMP1, the MIDI preamp.
Okay.
NAMM show. It would have been the NAMM show of January '93,
Okay.
and I was basically just brought on to demo that. But the guy who hired me, a guy called Richie Fliegler, I don't know if you know the name.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Richie was a great mentor of mine. He wrote an amazing book called Amps, the Other Half of Rock and Roll,
Okay.
which really brought to the forefront the fact that, as great as guitars are without an amp, it's just a piece of wood with some strings on it. Like
Right.
the amp is as equally as important as the guitar, in my opinion. In fact, a lot of people would say, I'd rather have a so-so guitar and a great amp than vice versa.
Yeah, I could believe. Yeah, for sure.
Because the amp's where the sound ultimately emanates from. It obviously starts here, hopefully, and here, but it's got to go through something.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was brought on to demonstrate that, and then on a whim, they sent me out with some sales reps to see how I dealt with people in stores. And for whatever reason, I guess I bribed the guys enough, and they said, "Hey, this guy's got what it takes." So I ended up being a full-time, what they call a product specialist, and then I became involved in artist relationships and marketing, and I was pretty much pulled into the voicing of stuff pretty much almost as soon as I got there because of my past and because and for some reason, Jim Marshall was an amazing human being, obviously a bad judge of character because he liked me and kind of took me under his wing, and he had a profound influence on my life actually to the degree that I have his tattoo on my arm
Awesome, man.
just because like I learned so much from Jim Marshall.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
you know,
When you came on with him, he was probably what, 50?
I can't. My math is horrible. 69, yeah, in his 50s, yeah.
In his 50s, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the guy had the energy of someone a third his age, and
Right. Right.
he was driven by passion. You know, he was driven by passion. And anyway, fast forward to 90, it would have been 95, 96. Richie left to join Fender.
Okay.
I just started doing artist relations, and when Richie left, I decided that I really didn't want to work under anyone else. So I went to our boss and said, I'd like to have a shot at the product manager job, which was Richie's job. And they gave me the shot. And one of the first things Richie said to me was, I know how you are with artists. You'll never get a signature on a Marshall apart from Jim's. And there's a saying that says, if you want someone to do something, tell them they can't do it. I don't know if Richie meant to do that, but the I was responsible for bringing for uniting Slash
And
um
Jim.
and Jim, and it was the perfect storm in as much as there was he was doing Slash's Snake Pit at the time. You know,
Yeah.
he was it was after his first stint with Guns N' Roses, of which he wasn't a stint, he was an integral part of that band. Like
Sure.
to me, Guns N' Roses without Slash is like Aerosmith without Joe Perry.
Right. Right.
It has to be Axl and Slash. It's the same kind of deal.
Hmm.
Not meaning to belittle any of the roles the others played, which was incredibly crucial because that first album is still a landmark album for obvious reasons. There
Yeah.
was there was that synergy there. But long story short, I just felt it was Slash was synonymous with the Silver Jubilee, the 2555,
Right.
and because of Axl, he they became rarer than rocking horse droppings because of Slash, and also, that like that wonderful player in the Black Crows whose name is slipping me right now. How dare I? But anyway,
Rich Robertson.
yeah, no, not Rich Robertson,
Okay.
the like the lead guitar player, and I'm spazzing on his name. I'll remember after
Yeah. Yeah.
this podcast is on. Anyway, you couldn't find them for love nor money, and Slash was synonymous with it. And so I approached Slash first and said, "Hey, I know you lost all of your 20, because he bought a boatload of them,
Okay.
but they all like when there was the riot in I think St. Louis, they found some of his backline actually in the foyer of
Wow.
the auditorium.
Wow.
So stuff got trashed and whatnot. And I can't remember if I approached Jim or Slash first. I think I approached Slash first to see if he'd be interested. I said, look, this is a long shot, but would you be interested in doing a signature series limited edition reissue of that amp? And he was like, yeah, I would. And then anyway, when I went to present it to Jim, Slash had just played the Monsters of Rock with Snake Pit at Donington, England, and he was on the front cover of Kerrang magazine, which was the heavy metal Bible at the time,
Right.
print magazine. Once again, this is before the internet. He was on the front cover. The ad for the album was on the back cover, and he had like a 6-page center spread, and the gatefold in the middle, like the intro picture, was just a Silver Jubilee amp in black, which is what he used, with a top hat, a bottle of Heineken, and a cigarette burning on an ashtray. And I took that to Jim and said, look, this guy is so synonymous. They don't even use his damn picture for the start of his article. They just show a Marshall with a top hat, a cigarette, and a Heineken, and everyone knows who it is. And long story short, they met each other. They got on like a house on fire. And it was done purely out of mutual respect and admiration.
Wow. So that was one of the questions I talked to you a little bit about before, but signature models and signature guitars and all that sort of started around this time that you were doing this. This is probably the early 90s is when I first, like 90, 91, something like that. What was probably the first signature thing that was out there?
What was the first signature? Well,
Maybe
the first signature Marshall was obviously like the Slash one, the 2555,
right.
which came out at it was launched at the same time Eddie's Peavey came out.
Right. So why was Eddie not on the front side of that? with
Well,
Marshall.
Eddie's, I mean, I can't, I hate revisionist history,
Yeah, yeah.
but the like the deal with Peavy was already written in stone.
Okay.
Not like way, but I had no knowledge of Eddie wanting to do stuff, even looking for signature amps. The first time I knew of anything was like Nam met us and said, "Hey, we need security up the wazoo for this because you've got Slash and Peavy's got Eddie."
Mm,
And it was, you got to remember, there was no internet back then, so
right.
there was no rumor mill. I was like, "Oh, cool. What's Eddie doing?" So he's got a signature PV amp, but I know for a fact from speaking to the people involved in that amp, that wasn't a 2 month operation. That was a long, 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 long time.
Yeah, there was actually, there's actually been people on that were involved, like Dave Friedman. Dave Friedman knew that he had worked with Jose on a prototype that they had
Yeah,
passed around. It ended up in front of St. Louis Music before Peavy got it,
right.
and they never did anything with that amp. So, Ampeg could have had them, but they didn't. Ended up at Peavy's house.
Yeah, so I've got to know James Brown, wonderful amp designer, and he kind of cut his teeth on that first thing. And I know that took a long, 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 long time. So that was baked and written in stone way, way, way before the Slash thing. And the Slash thing was just me being a relentless son of a bitch and not giving up, and Jim being nice enough to go, yeah, this guy is synonymous, and no, we're not going to pay him a huge pile of money. We'll give him Slash obviously got some like a percentage of profit, but there
Right.
was no big payment. Like there were all sorts of rumors about people throwing around huge amounts of money, because I mean, Eddie was involved with Kramer like in the early 80s as well, so like, yeah, the endorsement thing, yeah, 80s, 90s, that's when it became a really big thing.
Became a thing. Yeah. And so Eddie, yeah, the whole signature thing, because that goes on and on after that into today. It's really become a thing. Everybody has a signature model today, whether it's guitar or amplifier. It's kind of like crazy. But the Marshall thing now, why was Jim so resistant? Just because he didn't want to pay anybody, or he didn't
Well,
feel good?
he didn't want it. Like, he wanted people to use. Well, it was relatively new to him as well, but
Okay.
he always wanted he didn't like the idea of having to pay someone to. He wanted people to use his amplifier because they loved it.
Right, right. I got you.
That was it. Period. He didn't want. I mean, there was a time in the late 80s and early 90s where you knew what guitar players were going to be in the ads. You just weren't sure what guitar they'd be pushing that month.
Right, I got you.
And if it's not done with integrity, it cheapens, in my opinion.
Right, I agree.
And I mean, would an Eddie Marshall been amazing? Yeah, but you know what? The 5150 that resulted has become its own thing, and it ended up being the EVH, like the impetus for Eddie to start his own brand. So
Right.
maybe it was just meant to be or not meant to be, whatever.
Right, right. But when we reflect back on that first sound, a lot of companies have come up, with models that are kind of based on that series of Marshalls that was so popular in '68. That's
Yeah,
become a thing.
yeah.
Yeah,
But they were all missing that essential ingredient, which was Edward Van Halen.
absolutely.
I saw Eddie do a jam at the 1985 Summer NAMM show in New Orleans, and when he jammed in a small ballroom for PV.
Yeah.
Was it for
Steve,
PV?
you're
No,
saying
no.
you're saying Steve Rosen was there. Steve Rosen was there, right?
I don't know if Steve was. I don't know if
Yeah.
Steve was. He must have. He was probably there, but
Yeah. He wrote that big article about that NAM show. They
yeah,
went
but
down there.
but there was a jam.
Hmm.
I saw Eddie play like a Telecaster through I think a Silverface, and it sounded exactly like Eddie Van Halen
That's right.
because it's Eddie Van Halen. The
Yeah.
magic comes from the fingers. Did the Marshall play a part? Yeah,
Sure.
but if anyone else, my favorite story is the one about. I'm sure you've heard the story of like the urban myth about Nugent, because like Ted Nugent was the first guy to take like a fledgling, well, not a fledgling, but like a newly signed Van Halen on tour,
Yep.
And apparently he was so intrigued by the sound Eddie was getting out of basically an old Marshall, some pedals in a bomb casing, and a homemade guitar that he bribed his tech $25 or something to let him play Eddie's guitar through Eddie's rig. And he did, and he sounded exactly like Ted Nugent. And that's the moral of the story.
Right, right. I've heard that story from him directly, when he's done interviews and he's talked about that whole thing. Yeah, it's amazing that, and it's so true, when you were there and you got, Malmsteen was ended up on the Marshalls with a signature line, he's always playing them though. That was another reason why probably Jim was attracted to him, right?
But like synonymous, all of the players that have had Marshall, like Lemmy,
Yeah, yeah.
a good friend of Jim's, Zach Wilde,
Yeah, right.
23 synonymous. Yeah, the Randy Rhoads,
Of
once
course.
again synonymous. Jimi Hendrix, both those posthumously done, unfortunately.
Hmm.
But for us, for players and large, but yeah, everyone. It was people that he didn't want someone. Oh, I use this brand, but give me a bunch of money, I'll use your brand. It's like no,
Right. That makes
that's
sense.
that's not how Jim rolled. He wanted the relationship to be honest and open ended. Like he wouldn't sign artists to a deal. He refused to do that.
Hmm. Right,
Like
right,
if you do this, you can only do this. It's like no. If you like other stuff, use it.
right, right. Totally. What else did you learn from Jim when you were there?
The biggest thing I learned, the things I learned from Jim were to listen, to shut up and listen to people,
Hmm.
because you can, like, listen to your customer, and it doesn't have to be a Slash. It can be a 13-year-old kid. Like Jim once told me that if a 13, if a kid comes on as an apprentice, he'll listen. He said, I've learned stuff from 17-year-old, 18-year-old kids fresh on the factory floor because they're seeing what I see through a different pair of eyes. And so they might see something I've overlooked or missed. So he was always like, listen to everyone, listen very carefully to what people want, make sure you understand what they want, and then try not to only meet their expectations, but exceed them, which is how the first Marshall came about in the first place. It was by him listening very carefully to the likes of Pete Townsend, because it was the Fender Bassman was the only amp in town at the time. And as Pete said, Pete told Jim it was a great amp, but it was very expensive, very hard to find, and it was a little bit too polite.
Right.
He wanted something ruder, and Jim knew a lot about tubes, but he wasn't a guitar player, but he was very good at listening to people, understanding what they wanted. And then he got Ken Brown and a guy called Dudley Craven to build the first Marshalls. And the first one, which was I think it was the sixth one built, which is known as number one, was the first one when someone played it, and Jim listened to each one and said, no, not quite, not quite. And then that one was when he went, yeah, that's the sound I hear in my head that these guys have been telling me about. And Pete Townsend confirmed that. So yeah, listen and treat people with respect.
Yeah. You were saying this offline. We were talking about how, and one of the reasons I always wear my hat, and this has become like for me in my town, like Slash's hat. This is
Right.
my hat. This is what I always wore for the last 20 years because when I saw Jim work at the NAMM show, and when I say work, sign autographs and meet his customers, he did it with such class and he gave you a lot of time and he spent all day at that booth. I don't know that I don't even know if he went to lunch. He just was there all day.
No, it was his way of saying thank you, and there was nothing fake about the man. It was a
Right.
very sincere. He realized he valued his customers as much as they valued him, maybe even more, because he realized without them he'd be nothing. I tell you a great quick story. We took him to the Dallas Guitar Show at the
Okay.
Cotton Bowl back in the day. Jim turned up early because he wanted to survey the surroundings
Okay.
and just to meet people. And he ended up signing for an hour before the booths opened because all the other vendors, all the other people with booth there wanted his signature.
Mm.
So I started keeping count of how many things he signed because he wouldn't leave the premises for lunch. He was like, no, well, like we'll eat at a little restaurant over here. And he would let people, he said, Nick, if someone comes and wants an autograph, please don't I know you want me to eat, but I don't want to be rude to someone. So he signed throughout lunch. People were very respectful, actually. They saw when he was eating, but when he was in between courses, they'd come over, hey, Mr. Marshall, would you mind? And Jim being Jim, I stopped counting at 1,200 and something because I'd had enough.
Wow.
And it wasn't one of these, like you watch some guys sign and they don't even look at the person. It's like, yep, yep. He would find their name out. He would, if they called him Mr. Marshall, he would say, no, no, Jim's the name, son or sir, or madam. Just a genuinely nice person.
Yeah, I tell you what, it was always my highlight to see him every year that I went, because I almost went every year, and every year I went by to see him and take a picture with him, and I always just respected him for for the simple courtesy that he had.
Yeah, he was and people. I had numerous dinners with and lunches with Jim with like guests, and people would say, and people would always ask the same. There was like 9 or 10 questions that it was asked, and people would say, "Aren't you tired of hearing the same stories?" It's like, no, because every time Jim told the story, he knew it was the first time that person had heard it, so he told it like it was the first time. He told it with it wasn't autopilot.
Right, right.
He engaged with the person and he got it. It was a joy to watch a true master who, and I said, and how can I get tired of hearing Jim Marshall talk about working with like Pete Townsend, meeting Jimi Hendrix, having Keith Moon work in his shop? That's the stuff of legends. And I'm hearing it from source. No, sign me up for the next 500 meals. I'm there. And I will enjoy it because he told it, like I said, he told it was like he realized it might be the 5 millionth time he told the story, but the people he was telling it to had never heard it before. And he told it with that enthusiasm. And it was infectious.
Right. I mean, I just talking to him as little as I did, I just always felt, some kind of connection to him and the way he was.
Oh, he always had a sparkle in his eyes.
Yeah, he was a wonderful man, I'm glad to have you because you're about as close as you had 20 years with the guy, so that's
Yeah.
amazing.
And it was a profound pleasure. It was an honor, seriously.
Wow. So did he? There's a
Funny
question.
guy.
There's a question about Jim that I want to ask you, and then we'll move on. There's always the thing that he would actually work in the shop, in the wood shop, putting together cabinets. Is that true? The Tolex, or is that true?
What would happen was this. So when the factory got busy, he
Yeah.
would just roll his sleeves up and help. And he would be mainly involved in the woodworking side of things. So he would be involved in cabinet assembly and stuff. And then what would happen if a cabinet came back with a fault? The workers would go, oh, because they respectfully call him the governor.
Right, right.
Oh, the gov must have made that one. So Jim was like, you know what we're going to do, lads? We're going to put your money put your name where your mouth is. Put pride in your work and sign when you make something, sign it.
Yeah.
So there was a bunch of cabinets that had Jim Marshall's signature in it and if you get a cabinet with Jim Marshall's signature inside, it means he played a role in making that cabinet.
Right. I'd always heard that. And
Yeah,
of course, saying the signatures inside of, not only the heads, but for the sign off, but for in the cabinets.
Yeah, because he wanted people to be, take pride in your work and be accountable as well. He's like,
Yeah.
you're not blaming me. I'm going to sign every damn thing I make from here on in, and you're going to do the same. And it became a thing.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So there's so many things in the Marshall story, like the colored Tolex is always a thing for guitar players. You know that. And we fetish the purple or the orange or what, all those rare colors. It's like one of those things. It's a story within the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your book is wonderful, by the way. And this is probably out of print, right?
Yeah, it is now, unfortunately. But and much respect and love has to go to Mike Doyle, who's probably the ultimate historian of Marshall.
Right.
So Mike wrote Mike wrote half of it. I wrote half of it.
Right, right. It's a wonderful book. It's a great resource to go back and look through whenever I'm having questions about what a particular year or anything. Go
Right.
back and trying to figure things out about the Marshalls that I have, and I have a bunch.
Good. As one should. As one should.
25, 55, and 87 white JCM 800 50 watt,
Nice.
77 JMP.
Ooh.
I got a triple super lead 100. What else I got back there? I've got a whole, and I got 7 cabins.
Good for you. Good for you.
So I love Jim and I love Marshall. I'm glad we could talk about him a little bit, man. Thanks for doing that. And I love that guy. I just wanted to give him the props that he deserves for all these.
Yeah, I always say that, and I think I say at the start of the book, is a lot of people say that rock and roll as rock guitar as we know and love it was birthed by 4 people, 3 British, 1 American, namely the American being Hendrix, the 3 British being Page, Beck, and Clapton, and you got to throw Townsend in there, make it 5. In reality, I say it's 1 Brit and 3 Americans, because 1 Brit and 3 Americans made the tools by which these people were able to paint their wonderful sonic tapestries, and those obviously Leo Fender.
Yeah.
Where would the world be without the Strat or the Bassman or the Twin or the Telly for that matter? Les Paul,
of course,
goes without saying, not only from the luthier side of things of the guitar, but also all of the innovative stuff he did with regards to recording and multi-tracking.
Right.
The other guy you got to give props to that is often overlooked is Seth Lover, who was responsible for the first humbucker. Because I'm sorry, a Les Paul with a single coil, ain't gonna cut it. So those 4 guys, man. So they provided the tools by which without those 4 guys creating those wonderful tools, I don't think it would be a very different world we live in right now. And the things on your wall and those Marshalls you had might be model trains or something. Who knows?
Right. It's amazing. I said, I've been collecting Marshalls since I got my first lead 12 when I was, 14 or 15. I got my first Marshall. And ever since, man, I've just got a pile and I'll never get rid of them. Was it my friend Chris Gill said you don't have any regret if you don't get rid of anything, if you're a hoarder.
No, and we were talking about Steve Rosen before, and right. Steve, if anyone watching this, if you don't have Steve's book, Tone Chaser, you got to get it. And the same with Mr. Gill. He did something with Brad Talinsky, Eruption.
Yep.
These are the 2 Bibles, in my opinion, regarding the late great Edward.
Well, speaking of that, you just mentioned the impact of those great gentlemen. Eddie Van Halen, when you kind of like stack up his impact next to those guys, like say Les Paul, it's a very similar kind of width, as far as the industry goes. What do you say?
I would say, once again, Eddie changed the way people perceive. He changed guitar playing. He didn't just raise the bar, he reinvented the bar. Right. In my humble opinion, he took it to his impact was as profound as Jimi Hendrix's.
Right.
It really was. And the amount of people he influenced directly and indirectly is to this very day still remarkable. And what he created was timeless. It really was. And he was the reason I wanted a Strat with a humbucker in it. He was the reason I wanted a Floyd Rose.
Right.
Yada 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 yada.
Yeah, we all did. It's immediately that's what I wanted, a single humbucker and whatever. You gotta have a single humbucker, but
yeah.
It's great.
And the angle, and it's I would read, it's because we're old guys, we can there was a glorious time before the internet where I remember I interviewed Nuno Betancourt last year, and he said, the internet's destroyed some of the mythology of rock and roll.
Yeah.
I remember, I had a cousin in America, and my cousin in America bought and airmailed me the Van Halen guitar player cover.
Oh, yeah.
And I read that thing until it fell apart. I clung to every word he had to say, everything from picks to strings to the whole, everything. Right. And that was the only way you could find that stuff. You couldn't go, Siri, tell me about Eddie Van Halen's guitar. You had to go and search. And back in the day, if you wanted to see a great band and you were going to see a band you loved and you hadn't heard of the support act, you couldn't go on YouTube or Spotify and check them out. You actually had to go to the concert early. and I'm glad I did that when Black Sabbath toured England with Van Halen, because I saw something that was truly astounding.
Wow. Which venue did you see it in England?
Birmingham somewhere, Birmingham
Okay.
Odeon, I think it was. But
Yeah.
yeah, just that, just because hearing it is one thing, but seeing it, god damn.
Yeah. Tell me about that a little bit because, there's it was funny. The Def Leppard guys, both Phil and Rick, saw them on that same tour in Europe that year. And
Yeah.
it profoundly changed Rick just as much as it changed Phil. So
Yeah,
tell me
because,
about your experience.
oh, you just watched something that was, I mean, I got to say this, I mean, the showmanship and the FU passion, though, they came out and destroyed. They weren't arrogant, they were confident. David Lee Roth is one of the best frontmen I've ever seen.
Mhm.
And you put him, and Edward and David always get the attention, but that rhythm section, oh my God. Talk about a foundation to build magic on. Without those, you talked earlier about how much Edward was linked to, we talked about how much like Eddie's symbiotic relationship with Alex. Then you've got Michael Anthony's bass lines, which always, I mean, you listen to that first album, a lot of it's a three-piece.
Oh yeah.
That was the power of that band. And live, there was no studio trickery involved. Mr. Templeman just he caught lightning in a bottle, and
Mhm.
that lightning in a bottle was there for everyone to see on that stage that night. It was just like, holy crap. It made you rethink everything you thought was great.
Yeah,
Because
right.
it was a new level of everything.
Right. Everything.
At
That's right.
the risk of being sounding like duh, I walked out like they call, they say jaw-dropping moments. So the first four times I saw that band, you left like this
Right on.
because there was that you words couldn't describe what you'd just seen
Right. I've
and
seen
heard.
it's funny because you say that, the very first episode I did was a guy named Mike Simmons from Nashville. Was at Blackbird, one of their guys there at Nashville,
Right,
Blackbird Studios. And he accidentally his boss gave him tickets to see Black Sabbath in Nashville in 78. He had no idea what he's about to see. He walked in and Van Halen came out. Of course, this is the famous show where Ozzy got lost in his room and didn't show up.
right.
So he not only got the show, he got an extra part of the show because they had to keep playing, and then he got the makeup show too, which was a matinee. And
Unbelievable.
he says the same thing you do. He just blew his mind.
Yeah, like how is that guy making so much noise and so much musicality with what he's got?
Right, right.
It was just, and it was because it was Edward.
That tour, man,
You know,
it's
we
amazing.
we are so blessed to have, of all the times, of all the eras we could have been born to. I'm often asked, would you like to be 25 again? It's like, yeah, there's one condition though, and people will go, what is it? I said it would have to be 1985 again because I don't want to be 25 today because I'd have missed all the good stuff.
Right. I mean, it's just amazing, right? When you think about all the players, and
Yeah,
my wife and I were watching the thing on Gary Moore's guitar with Kirk Hammett the other night, with Gibson's TV thing. And to look at that guitar and think what Gary Moore did with it and the power of it and all those guys through that era.
yeah, and it was, and what Peter Green did with it before then.
Right. Oh, of course. Yeah. Of course.
Staggering. Yeah.
Amazing. Right. So let's get on to some of your stories. You have this story. You said it's the Simon Van Halen story. Tell me about this.
Yeah, this is what this is a story you can't make up. So this would be early 80s.
Okay.
Grim Reaper just started to make a name of ourselves because it was like, pre-internet, before heavy metal charts existed. Because of the new wave of heavy metal, there were heavy metal DJs in England that were so impactful and had such a draw that the major weekly make papers at the time, Sounds, Melody Maker, and New Musical Express, which were weekly papers, by the way,
Okay.
they all had heavy metal charts, and they were based on what these DJs were playing and what the crowd reaction was. So we started appearing in those charts with a demo.
Okay.
So we started to get a name for ourselves, and we started using a company called LSD. Wonderful, wonderful name. Light Sound and Design. It was an acronym for. And I became good friends with those guys. Once again, they had poor taste. They liked the band. And I was at Manchester University in the early 80s when Van Halen came to do the Women and Children First tour.
Okay.
So the LSD guys called, and this, once again, you got to remember, this is payphones. This is not cell phones. They didn't exist.
Right.
They called my dorm because they had that number because I used to call them about gigs. Say, hey, and we would use a tiny percentage we would use a tiny PA and a tiny bit of their lights. In the meantime, they had huge rigs going out with the likes of Ozzy Osbourne and Van Halen, national and international acts. And they called, said, hey, Nick, we're sure you've got a ticket already. Do you want to come and watch Van Halen from the desk with us? And I'm like, dude, I would love to. When they played Manchester Apollo, we were talking. So they called my student dorm that someone had to find me. I went to the payphone and they said, oh, by the way, we know you're a huge fan. We know what hotel the band are in. I said, but we're going to tell you, but you didn't hear it from us. So they told me the name of the hotel. And once again, there was no Google, there was no Siri. I found Yellow Pages, found the number of the hotel, and I was playing a striped copy guitar that I'd striped myself with electrical tape with a Mighty Mite humbucker in at the time because I couldn't afford a Damasio. And we would play, and Grim Reaper at the time, this was pre-Steve Grimmett, we would play Running with the Devil and Ain't Talking About Love, and You Really Got Me.
Right.
And I would butcher Eddie solo. So I figured, you know what? I had balls of steel back then, I guess, or I was just stupid, or both. I found the hotel's number and I called them up and using the worst American accent ever. I said, yeah, hi, is this whatever the hotel was called, the Regis Hotel. So my name is Simon Van Halen and my cousins Edward and Alex are checking in later. Could I leave them a message? And they said, yes, Mr. Van Halen, certainly. So I started dictating the message. And halfway through, and this woman's writing it down.
Right.
I went, actually, whereabouts you located? Horrible American accent. They said such. I said, well, as luck would happenstance would have it, I'll be around the area about 4 o'clock. Do you mind if I pop in and surprise the guys? And they said, not at all. We'll tell the door to expect you. So I put my suit jacket on, put my stupid cheap striped guitar in a guitar case, over the shoulder guitar bag, and I headed down to the hotel. And by the time I got there were probably about 50 or 60 kids outside. I went up to the front door and the guy goes, can I help you? I said, yeah, my name's Ziggy. He goes, you must be Simon Van Halen. We're expecting you. So he ushers me in through these kids, takes me to the hotel. They said, sorry, your cousins are delayed, but we will put you in the bar and give you some gratuity drinks.
Oh, wow.
I'm thinking, shit. There's no turning back now. So I'm in the bar getting Dutch courage, no pun intended,
Right, right.
with free beers. And after about what seemed like an eternity, this big-assed American guy comes up and he goes, so you're Simon Van Halen, huh? He goes, my bet is you're not even American, let alone a Van Halen. I would tell her, I said, sorry, busted on both counts, guilty as charged. He goes, the band have heard your story. They think it's funny. They'll meet you. So as a result, I have my Women and Children's
All right.
album signed by all four guys, and I had Eddie sign the back of the.
Wow. Killer.
I sold the guitar, but kept the scratch plate.
Wow.
So
That's cool.
that was my Simon Van Halen story, and then I
Wow.
guess the next significant Van Halen story is I had the good fortune to be very close to the late great Dimebag,
Right.
and I'm sure you know the backstory about the fact that just like Eddie and Alex, Vinnie Paul, Dime's brother, who's also sadly no longer with us, Dime wanted to be a drummer in the same way Eddie did, but while Dime was earning the money to pay for the kit, his brother got better than him, so he took guitar. So there was a weird relationship with regards, there was a weird connection between Van Halen.
Hmm.
Dime loved Van Halen.
Yeah.
Also, Pantera. If you listen to Pantera, Walk is a swing song. That's why
Right.
people can't nail it because it swings. That Pantera are a triplet swing band. They're not they're not playing 16th or 32nd notes. Well, they are sometimes, but a lot of it's a swing. Just a hip. They call it the power groove. So fast forward, this would be the end of sometime during 2003. And if you were a close friend of Darrell's, I got to be really close with Darrell because I worked with him on his column for Guitar World.
Okay.
Supposed to run for 6 months, he ended up running for 48. He was going to come for a third run. We did a book together, but so he would call up at like ridiculous times of the morning, like 5 o'clock, and it wasn't because he was an early riser; he was still up.
Right. Right.
And a lot of the times, I would let it go to the voice. I would just let it go to the answer machine. Once again, pre cell phone, and it used to drive my wife nuts. She'd be going, it's your freaking friend Dime, isn't it? But one day she picked up the phone when he called, and he knew a name. He knew the name of the dog. He knew the name of our kids. She's going, I love that guy. Everyone loved Dime. But anyway,
Right.
the phone rings at like 10 past 5 or something ridiculous. And I'm just, it's probably Darrell. And we just let it go to the answer machine. And he's screaming. He nicknamed me Hitchcock when I shaved my head. And he said, he goes, Hitchcock, pick up the effing phone. The brothers met the brothers.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I said to my wife, said, you know what? I know what he's talking about. I have to take this call. So I picked up the phone and said, give me 5. I'm going to get a coffee because I knew it wasn't going to be a short story. So I made a coffee. And he tells me this whole story about how him and Vinny flew out to meet Van Halen at Eddie's invitation, and just told me the whole story about how great Ed was. And at the time, like Eddie had just done it was the art series. Do you remember that
Right.
limited edition run?
Oh yeah. I have one of them. I have the black, white, and red from that series. That
Yeah,
first one, 2004.
yeah, limited edition run.
Hmm.
And they'd been people were putting in pre-orders and they sold that instantly because there were only a certain amount of each. There was only 100 or so, of several hundred of each one.
Yeah.
So Dime said to me, Hitch, he goes, if you could get one of those, which one would you get? I said, well, I know they don't make a lefty, but if I could, it would have to be the black and white one because I remember where I was when I heard that record, and we'd had that conversation. He goes, I said, what about you? He goes, oh, for me, it's got to be the Bumblebee because Van Halen 2 was his record. He was younger than me. He was like
Yeah. Right.
7 years younger than me. So Van Halen 2 was his eruption, his wake up call. He said, man, because so him and Vinny watched from Matt Bruck, Eddie's long-term tech, and
Hmm.
one of the guys doing an amazing job over the EVH brand to this day, keeping that legacy alive with integrity.
Right.
And he said, yeah, we were sitting, we were with Matt, and I said to Matt, I said, look, I know the black and I know they're all sold out, but if someone cancels and there's no one ahead of me in the queue, is there any chance I could be on that list for one of the black and yellows? He said, and I'll pay whatever it is. If there's an extra charge, whatever. He goes, I know it's a slim chance, but is that possible? And so Matt said, yeah, let me speak to Ed. I'm sure we can put you on the list. I go, cool. He goes, no, it gets better or worse. He goes, it gets better. So what do you mean? He goes, well, we went backstage afterwards and Ed went, Darrell, come over here. He goes, I hear you want to get the black and yellow art series. He goes, yeah, Ed, but I don't want to jump the queue. I know they're sold out, but if someone cancels and there's not someone ahead of me, I'm not asking for anything. I'll pay full list price because I know it's collectible, blah, blah, blah. And Eddie he goes, no, he goes, 2 things. He goes, number one, you can have one. Number 2, you're not paying for it. Number 3, there's one condition. And he goes, what's the condition? And Ed said, you have to come to my house and I'll stripe it for you personally.
Wow.
And then sadly, because of what happened, that never happened.
Right.
I remember Darrell told me, he said, man, so we just ranted about what a great time it was. And he said, man, he goes, and Vinny confirmed this. He said on the plane flight back, I told Vinny, if if I die tomorrow, I'll die a happy man because the brothers met the brothers.
Right. Right.
So anyway, as I know you know, Ed, myself and Edward, well, I shouldn't be in the same sentence as Edward, but I spoke at the public memorial as did Edward, and Edward turned up to the funeral with the original black and white and put it in Dime's casket.
The black and yellow.
Yeah, black and yellow. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
His rationale was an original deserves the original.
Right. Right.
And so I wrote the story for Guitar World, sent it in, and then literally woke up with a cold sweat, called up Brad Polinsky, who we talked about earlier, and said,
Mhm.
I don't think we should run this story because I'm petrified someone will dig up the grave because that guitar is priceless.
Right. Right.
He said, well, we were feeling the same, but it's all over the internet, so we wouldn't be revealing anything. But anyway, long story short, at that, just before the public memorial, I was, Zach Wild's a very close friend of Darrell's, very close.
Right.
We were sitting in the rented Escalade Zach had with, it was me, Zach, his wife, and I think his road manager at the time, and he was playing me in this river, like the rough mix of this river. So this is my song for Dime, and this ties back to the Marshall story. So I got the part of my JMP getting the gig. I wrote a medley, which was like 60 riffs in 10 minutes, and it would go from like Michael Jackson to Metallica to U2 to Aerosmith to Pantera, yada yada yada, to show off the JMP one.
Mm-hmm.
Zach said, "Hey, I'm playing the 25th anniversary party for Guitar World. Why don't you do one of those medleys as a tribute to Dime and open for me?" He goes, awesome. And so I did. So I get to that NAMM show. My friends from Fender called me up and said, "Hey, we need you in the booth." So I went to the booth. I said, we understand you're doing this because we have something for you. And they gave me this. This is the only left-handed black and white art series.
Wow.
And
it's cool.
You're kidding me, right? I said, no, we heard what you were doing. We went to Edward. He remembered you from the funeral and said, absolutely build the guy when I give it to him if he'll use it.
Wow.
So, and does this thing have nicks and cracks and scratches on it? Yeah, it's a guitar, damn it. It's cool. It's supposed to be used. I would feel so guilty if I hung this up like some piece of art decor. It's a guitar that's supposed to be used. So
right.
The only thing I won't do is I refuse to fly with it.
Right.
I don't trust airlines. But yeah, so that's how I got that. And then I guess my last Van Halen story very quickly would be Fender were chasing me for years. And then so I left Marshall I didn't leave Marshall. I left the distributor of Marshall in the USA.
Okay.
Like the president of that company passed away, who was amazing.
Uh-huh.
And things changed, and so I decided that it was time to take Fender up on their offers. And one of their big carrots was you would get the chance to work with Edward Van Halen.
Right.
I was like, that would be a dream. So much as I didn't want to leave Jim, I didn't feel comfortable working with the setup that was representing Marshall in the States. So I left for a while, and friends in the industry, I had a couple of friends in the industry who said, hey man, we've heard the rumor. I said, yeah, it's true. And they said, well, what's the reason? I told them, one of the big reasons was I would get the chance to work for Ed. And I had a couple that said, well, Ed's a great guy, but he's really, really hard to work with. He's really, really hard to work with. And I have news for those guys. He wasn't hard to work with at all. He just had he took the same pride in his name and his name and the brand that his name was on as Jim Marshall did. Mm-hmm. He didn't understand. The term "that'll do" or "good enough" did not exist in the man's vocabulary. That's obvious from his musical legacy. And so, was he a stickler for detail? Yeah, he should be. It's his freaking name on the brand. Well, that'll do. No, it won't. Can it be better? Yes, it can. We'll make it better. that was Ed. It was a profound pleasure to work with the man. And one of my fondest memories was there were a couple of times where I was smoking at the time and he was, and we'd be outside of like one of the like a Fender facility smoking and just bullshitting, and you'd forget for a second who you were talking to because he was just a regular guy.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, your brain would go, "Shit, that's Eddie Van Halen."
Yeah.
And he did. Anyway, long story short, he did the when they did the limited edition like relic Frankenstein pickup.
Mm-hmm.
Fender guy said, "Hey, Ed likes you. You get on well. Why don't you just go hang out with him for a few hours because he's got 500 pickups to sign." And like we had slightly more than 500, and one of them he slightly smeared.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very end, he went, "Give me that one I smeared the date on," and he gave it to me as a thank you. And it's this one here. It says, I guess this is limited edition 501. It just says the last one.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
cool.
So I've been offered money for it. It's like, no,
Right. Never.
it was a gift from an icon.
Right on.
No, never. So
That's so cool. So you know what? A lot of people, since I've interviewed all these people, so many people have interacted with Ed. They all kind of say this one thing about him that you just kind of said, which is that he almost disarmed you with, his persona as a rock icon. Most people say that in a minute or two, he almost makes you forget this.
yeah, no, you do. You would forget. Then the only person that would remind you was you. He wouldn't go, "Oh, by the way, he didn't have any." And I think that was. I have to say, I've been very fortunate to work with some truly amazing people,
Right.
some iconic people. They say never meet your idols.
Yeah.
I would say don't meet the ones who were dicks.
Right.
Because Slash is a sweetheart who's just dedicated to his craft.
Right.
Dimebag Darrell, dedicated to his craft and just a sweetheart.
Yeah.
Eddie, the same thing. And they all had the same thing Jim Marshall had. No, they had no ego.
Yeah.
And they treated people how they would expect those people to treat them if the shoe was on the other foot. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Total sense. Yeah.
Just like regular human beings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, it was disarming because it was hard to forget, but
Right.
you'd get so wrapped in a conversation, you'd just like, and then this voice would go, "Dude, how cool was that? That was Eddie Van Halen."
Right. Right. I met him briefly at the Smithsonian the day that he was there for that whole thing, and it went just like you say, they said don't meet your heroes, but he was so warm, and it was like you said, there's just something about him that just kind of disarms you. He's so warm.
Well, one of my favorite moments, like I was involved in the Wolfgang launch
Yeah.
of his thing. So very quickly, my two favorite things were one, they were having all sorts. A bunch of copywriters had tried to write the intro to the, like the brochure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was on a coach with some, I think, musician's friend to the factory in Mexico, and I was talking to one of the guys in marketing, and they said, "Yeah, Ed doesn't like any of the stuff that's been presented." I said, "Well, what is it exactly you're looking at?" And they said, "Well, it's just the intro to the Wolfgang." I said, do you want me to give it a shot?" They said, "Yeah, you're a journalist. Yeah, we should have asked you in the first place." So I wrote something on that coach on a BlackBerry, so I wrote it on the coach, sent it. I called them a day later, and I spoke to the marketing. It's one of those moments when you go, if I never write another thing, I'm good with it.
Right.
Because he said, "So yeah, we liked we liked your opening two paragraphs, so we sent them to Ed." And he said he has one stipulation. I said, "Yeah, what does he want to change?" And they said, "This is exactly what he said to change, not one effing word." I went, okay, I'm done. I can retire. I can put the pen down.
You done. Yeah, right. That's amazing. Yeah, yeah. I read that thing that you wrote, and
Yeah.
it was
So anyway, so when it came time to do the launch, said, "Hey, it would be great if you would just if you could." They invited like 300 people there. They said it would be great if you could maybe give a speech. He goes, "Forget a speech." He goes, "Let's get a photographer there. I'll take a picture with every single person there." And he did.
Mhm.
It took a couple of hours, and he did it with. He didn't have to do that. No one asked him to do that. That was his idea as a thank you to those people who came to support him. That's that's just a good human being.
Right, right, right. And one of the reasons why I do this, when he was never somebody like you said who tooted his own horn. He wasn't like that. So it's like, he always played down all of that. And if you go way back to the 80s, it didn't seem like he really wanted to engage with MI that much until Kramer, of course, but in the initial few years, didn't seem like he wanted to be in the business part of it.
Well, he was a tinkerer. The thing I loved about Ed was like he had the same twinkle in his eye that Jim had
Hmm.
and that Dime had. When you started talking to him about stuff, it was him, man. It wasn't a stage persona. It wasn't a front. It was just a guy truly passionate about what he did.
Right,
Which
right.
and I think that's why his music will always live on. He didn't phone anything in.
Yeah. I think,
Not even.
when I saw him as a kid, I saw him on Don Kirshner's rock concert, right? So this is my first exposure to him. Unchained, the video, and
Right.
just the presence of his presentation, the smile, the whole fire of it, everything about it, man. It was the whole reason I'm here with you.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you are. And I think I'm sure you're aware of Andy Wood,
Oh yeah, of course.
great guitar player. But I
Yes.
I called Andy a couple of weeks ago and said, "Hey, man, I just want to say what you said about Ed was right on the money." He said, he said something like, why do so many people consider Ed the GOAT? He said, because no, he was an amazing player. He goes, you remember at the same time he was alive, there were people like Holdsworth as well, and
Right.
and Ed held Alan in huge esteem.
Of course.
He said the thing that makes Ed different from other people is you just see it in a picture. You didn't even have to you didn't have to see footage. You could tell from a picture of him playing the guitar on stage that he was having more fun than anyone else on this planet at that time. And that's infectious.
Absolutely.
And it leaves a mark you don't forget because it makes you engaged in what the man was doing because his passion was obvious even in black and white, even in a black and white photograph. And the same is, you can say that goes back to the Jim and Dime connection as well. And Slash for that matter, they have that passion,
Right.
and it's ingrained in them, and it shows in their eyes, that their tone of voice, how they get excited about things they've talked about millions of times, because it means something to them, and
Right.
that's why their gifts will outlive us all.
Yeah, you're right. That's exactly, how it hit me. It was, I knew is that moment, I knew that I'd be doing this for the rest of my life. And it was because of that honest thing that came across through the TV. It was like, how did this happen?
Yeah, and it's like all people who are truly great have that at whatever their craft is.
Yeah.
Be it a comedian, be it a painter, they all have that. It's not about fame and fortune. It's about what makes them smile.
Right. Right.
And that sums the Ed to a T. There was that infectious smile that was so, for once, of this can sound almost like some BS. There was a purity. There was a purity to that smile that was not lost on me.
Right. Right. And it's how complex his life was with everything that was going on with him, and but something about when he was on stage and whether that was the way he felt at that moment, he still transmitted this thing, you know, no matter
Yeah,
what.
I think when that, I think when when Ed had a guitar in his hand, it was his. He was at one with everything.
Right, right, and he transmitted it to the world, and that's why we're all still in love with this guy.
Yeah, and it's and you can't, there are you can't there are lots of people. I just did the Dimebag because it's 20 years since Dime passed in 6 days, which is
Wow,
staggering. Well, no,
seemed like
since
yesterday, man.
taken, I should say.
It's crazy.
And one of the things that was always profound about him was there was there was that unashamed joy in everything he did,
Yeah,
and it was and that's why we'll be talking about, that's why generations after us will still be talking about those gentlemen,
right,
because
right,
it wasn't just what they did on this, it wasn't just the music. But anyway, so Sterling, I interviewed a bunch of people about, why is Dimebag still so far beyond relevant, 20 years after his passing. And Sterling Winfield, who was the guy that produced like the last record,
okay,
reinventing the steel, he said the thing about Darrell is, like, he was the first to do what he did. He goes, countless people have done it since then, but no one did it before him. And that's the same is true of Edward.
right, right,
Edward did something that no one has done since. Yeah, people copy him. Every time someone taps, you go, yeah, that's Ed.
right, right, right,
Because he owns it, and he deserve, he was the first to admit, no, I wasn't the first guy to do it, but he was the first guy to take it and make it his. It was his. But as much as I love the tapping, to me, the magic was the whole. He was the full meal deal, as you'd say.
right,
Those riffs, those fills, those times when he didn't play,
right,
like,
right,
he knew when not to play, and he knew when it was best to play a melody versus, like, going back to the first solo I ever heard him play was the one in Running with the Devil, which is probably the only one the closest I'll ever come to playing it, something that he did kind of sort of maybe like him just a smidgen. But
right.
even then, you can't. There's something about, the way he played it is different to everybody else.
Right. Last three notes of that where it's like I think it's a double bend, right?
I can't do. That's the one part
That's
where I go to shit on that. I can't do it.
everybody struggles with it. And if you watch him do it, I watched him do it on Kimmel, which is so much later in his career. But then there's another video that if you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube, and the guys called this show Another Day at the Office, Eddie Van Halen. It's from one of the 2012 shows. It's
Right.
all close-ups on his hands, the whole show, all close-ups. And you see the things that you always like, you like that little last ending, how he stays in one position. You see all these other people doing it, moving it around, but he's in one position those last three notes.
He made it effortless. Well, because the thing, it was him.
I know.
Like, he wasn't copying anybody. He was being Edward.
I know. It's so weird though.
That's
It's so hard to figure it out though. It's as simple as those last three notes are. It's like I'm sitting there going, "What is this?"
and I think it comes back to the difference. The reason he was who he was is that he could take something seemingly simple and make it magical, that people can't duplicate.
Right, right.
I'm still trying to this day. I've got it. No, you don't. I've got it. No, you don't.
It's like fairy dust on whatever you play. It just somehow we don't have the fairy dust.
But no, because it came from within.
Right,
That's
right.
that's the beauty of, and, like, talk about lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
And pretty much every time I saw them live 5 times with him,
Mhm.
including the last run. with David.
Dave. Yeah.
And just magic, because there was a sense of, for want of a better word, joy. There
Right.
was a primal joy in everything he did. And he transmitted, like you said, transmission is a great way of summing up what he did. He transmitted joy via his guitar, joy and passion.
Yeah, I think of the jump video when he turns around a couple of times and he smiles at the camera in a certain way. It's crazy how it
Yeah,
is.
that's why he was Ed. That's why we're having this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you a question that I was asked to ask you by one of your friends that worked with you at EVH while you were doing the Wolfgang launch. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say his name, but because of the subject, Dimebag Darrell and you and this person hung out at Dimebag's place, and apparently you all had a really good time. It's the clubhouse, right?
Yeah. The clubhouse. Yeah.
Apparently it was a rough morning the day after. Do you remember this get
There,
together?
there's
I'll
I
say
have
it is Chris Gill and you.
no I know exactly where I had so many I have so many fond memories with Darrell by rights. I think I jokingly said at his I half jokingly, half seriously said it at the public memorial. I said, I had the honor, the privilege of working with him on his column, and so I would guitar. Well, I don't mind saying this now because it's past tense, but they would fly because his column was such a huge success. They would fly me out like when I was running out of material. They go, "Hey, he's back home. Do you want to? Why don't we send you out there for a couple of days?"
Right.
So I'd fly out. Dime would go, "Okay, what do you need? I'll send you a video. Let's go drink." And we would go and dick around on Guitar World's expense. And then he would send me videos, which is like some of those hidden lessons, the lost lessons.
Yeah.
Those were things he sent me because we didn't do any work while I was there. We just had fun. He's like, dude, I want to hang with you. I can send you a video and you can do your magic and then you can send it to me, but I don't want to waste this time doing a guitar lesson. Let's go hang out. Oh yeah, brain cells. I just think I said we drank enough to kill a small nation.
That's what Chris said. He said the hangover was the worst of his life.
It was brutal. And because the thing is, and it wasn't peer pressure. It
Okay.
was just there was no pressure at all. Like if someone didn't drink, Dime wouldn't force it on them.
Right, right.
If someone had a reason, but you just got caught up in the motion. You got caught up in the moment. Yeah.
Right.
Dime,
I've seen a lot of their videos, of him hanging out, just watching him just be himself. And it's really interesting, like you said, with Edward, how he's so natural.
yeah, and there was nothing. I've got many favorite. I'll tell you my favorite Darrell. I've got one of my favorite Darrell stories. If you've got time,
Sure, of course.
so I was. This would be mid '90s, just when Van Halen, just when Pantera had gotten really big.
Right.
I was doing a series of guitar clinics in the Midwest. I went to this one store, and the owner comes up. He goes, you must be friends with Darrell from Pantera. You must be really good friends with Darrell from Pantera. I said, yeah, we're friends. I said, what makes you say that? He said, well, he was in here doing a signing last week,
Mm.
and he left me $75 to get you so drunk you couldn't play at your clinic. So I said, you've got the $75, right? He goes, yeah. I said, we'll drink it after the clinic. Like we will honor the $75 in the way it was supposed to be spent, but it'll be post clinic, not pre. And the guy goes, can I ask you a question about that? I said, sure. He goes, because I saw something really profound. I said, explain. So Darrell, like Jim Marshall, like Slash, and all the true people who really respect their fans. His signing sessions were really personable. He
Mhm.
would,
I've heard
yeah,
that.
yeah. Right. So he had the ability to make the person he was talking to feel like they were the only person in the room at the time. Lots of people say that about Darrell.
Yeah,
Gifted.
who said that about Darrell to me directly was Grover Jackson.
Yeah. Hey,
When
Darrell
you
would make you feel like you were the only. I missed trains galore because of Dime. Because you could. When's the last train? You're going to miss it. And I didn't care. But so anyway, so the guy goes, so he's doing this clinic, and he said, I know you know him, so you know how personable he is. He goes, a kid and his dad. He goes, the kid must have been 12. So Darrell goes, hey son, what's your name? And the kid tells him. He goes, so what brings you here? Your dad? He goes, no. He goes, you're the reason I'm going to start playing guitar. He goes, really? You're going to start playing guitar? He goes, yeah. My dad's going to get me a guitar for Christmas.
Mm.
And Darrell goes, Dad, come over here. He goes, dude, it's July. Don't make the kid work until Christmas. Wait until Christmas. And the father leans forward and basically says, I just got divorced and I've just got laid off. So Christmas is the earliest time. Said, hey, man, I'm sorry. Kept it down low, signed the stuff. And the owner said, as those two walked away from the desk, he called the owner over. He goes, see if they'll stay behind. See if this guy and his son will stay behind until after the clinic. I want to talk to him. So, well, after the signing. So the guy says, okay, so we did that. They agreed. They got nowhere else to go, and they figured out another chance to talk to Dime for 2 more minutes. We'll take it. So when the clinic was done, Dime went to the manager of the store. He goes, show me where the good guitars are, not the really expensive ones. Show me the wall where the decent guitars are, not the cheapo ones. Because this was like the mid-90s. There were still bad guitars out there.
Sure.
He said, show me where there were some decent guitars. So he said, from here to here, there was a price range. These were really good. So Darrell goes over to the son and the dad. He goes, hey guys, come over here for a second. He goes, son, you see these guitars here? He goes, take your pick. Happy Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And he bought the guitar for the kid. And then he told the owner, please do not speak a word of this. I do not embarrass this gentleman, and I don't want any praise. This is not about me. It's about that kid wanting to play guitar.
Mm.
And that was Darrell in a nutshell.
Wow, it's cool.
And I've since told that story to people, and they've told me similar stories about him finding someone down in luck and just going, hey, take this.
Mm. Mm.
That's the real deal, man. That's not a
Right. It's amazing, isn't it?
No, it's staggering. And I remember once Pantera did a 3-night stint at one of the New York venues, and Guitar World put me in the same hotel as Darrell, even though I lived on Long Island. Said, look, just be there for 3 days and get what because the column was running on firing all 6 cylinders.
Mm-hmm.
And the second night, Darrell was like sick, and he goes, "Hey man," he goes, "What? Why don't we and you just split? We'll have a couple of beers at the hotel, and then we'll get an early night, and then we'll do some column stuff in the morning." So I said, yeah, okay. So we were going to just disappear out of the back door because the hotel was only like 3 blocks away. It was just like, we'll just walk it. I said, what about your bodyguard? He said, it doesn't matter. It was just me and you. It'll be cool. So I opened the backstage door, and there had to be like 150 kids out there just hoping.
Mm-hmm.
I went back in and I said, dude, there's 150 kids there. Do you want me to tell them you're sick? I'm sure they'll understand. He goes, no, fuck that. Walks outside and spends the best part of an hour signing every single thing and taking pictures. And the kid, he was sick.
Mm.
He was genuinely sick, and he didn't rush anything. He took time. And when it was all done, no one got rushed. We're walking back to the hotel. I said, Tom, I got to ask you a question, man. I said, I know you're sick because you ditched on the backstage party. What possessed you to do what you just did? Because it was remarkable. He goes, Nick, it's real simple. He goes, I just flipped the roles. If I was them and they were me, how would I want them to treat me? That's how I roll. And that's a real star in my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just what they play, it's the respect and love they give their fans. And Darrell exuded that.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. I was going to ask you one other thing before we wrap it up. I know you got to go to bed and go back to work again.
No, this is work. No, yeah. No, it's not.
Okay. Well, you got to get up. So, Randy Rhoads, you met Randy. I heard this story briefly for a minute. I was just going through a lot of stuff on the internet. You met Randy at one point, right?
Yeah, and it goes back to LSD again.
Okay.
So And it goes back to one of the most underrated and overlooked bands of the who were actually kind of pre the new wave of British heavy metal, Budgie.
Okay, I've heard that.
The first band I ever went to see, the first metal band I went to see live, my first ever concert was Budgie at Malvern Winter Gardens.
Okay.
I became a huge fan. Their original guitar player left, and they got another guitar player from a band called the George Hatcher Band. His name was John Thomas.
Okay.
We call him Big John Thomas. And if you look up what John Thomas is slang for in England, you'll understand the humor of that.
Right.
Big John Thomas. Okay, yeah. So I call him Big JT. Budgie got. I became. So I went. My dad was a guitar. My dad started playing guitar late in life, and he sucked. To be honest with you, he sucked, but he loved it. And people often ask me, what's your definition of a successful musician? And I'll say my dad. They go, what do you mean? I heard you said he sucked. He goes, yeah, but he had this friend called Ron who played saxophone as badly as my father played guitar. And my mother, who was a very talented piano player, I said they were the reason I started drinking really early on Friday night, is that my mother, God bless her, would play this gorgeous piano and these two guys would play along with her and just massacre everything.
Oh.
Freaking horrendous. It was like cats being killed.
Oh, Lord.
But I would look through the window and watch my father and Ron playing with my mother, and they had the same kind of grins that Eddie had.
Yeah,
And
right.
which meant they loved what they were doing and they loved their music. That to me is a successful musician, someone who's playing it and is enjoying it for the sake of because they love it, not because people are clapping, not because people are watching, not because they've got a platinum record, but because they genuinely love it. So that to me is a true musician, a successful musician, someone who plays an instrument and genuinely loves it. That's success in my eyes. So me and my mum persuaded my dad to buy a Gibson. So he bought a 25, 50 anniversary back in the day.
Okay.
So he got invited to a Gibson party in Birmingham. So I went with him, and John Thomas from Budgie was there.
Oh.
And I talked to him for a few minutes, and I gave him the first Grim Reaper demo tape, Bleed 'Em Dry, which was pre-Steve Grimmett. And there were a couple of ballads on it where I used a big muff with a screaming tree in front of it to get my sound.
Okay.
And John said, "Hey, give me a number, and I'll let you know what I think of the demo." And I'm like, "Yeah, sure you will." Jethro is just being a nice guy. So the next day, my mom comes. She goes, "Hey, there's a guy on the phone called John Thomas." I'm like, "What?" So and John's like, "Hey, man," he goes, "Yeah. Hey, Nick. Hey, mate." He didn't say man. He's English. He goes, "Hey, mate. Yeah, I was listening to your tape because." He goes, "It's great." He goes, "How are you getting that sound? What are you doing?" So I told him it was a screaming tree in front of a big muff into this solid state amp. And we became friends.
Mm-hmm.
We became really good friends. And I would go see him, and I'd go and see him after work, and we just hang out. Then when Ozzy got Randy, the opening act for that first tour for the Blizzard of Oz was Budgie.
Wow.
And Randy and John became really close friends, to the point that John would travel on Ozzy's bus, or Randy would travel on John's bus, and he would stay at John's house and stuff. And anyway, long story short, so John always said, "Hey, if you ever bump into Randy, just tell him you're a friend of JT's." So there was a gig in Bristol called the Granary, which was kind of like the Rainbow in as much as it wasn't huge, but it was a prestigious venue where everyone from literally AC/DC to Led Zeppelin had played.
Right.
And they had a plaque on the wall that said that. So when we played there, I said to the band, I said, "Look, this is a big gig. I'm going to blow everything we're being paid on LSD. I want the best lights we can get." So I called LSD and said, "Hey, we're doing this show. What can I get for this?" And they turned up to the show, and they got way, way more. They got like twice as much stuff, maybe 3 times as much stuff as I was expecting and were hoping for. I took the guy to one side. I said, "Chris," I said, did you mistakenly hear an extra zero?" He goes, No. He goes, "This, like, we're on our way to the like we're on our way to the first Ozzy Osbourne tour of just we just throw some extra lights in your way. So after the show, they're like, "Hey, you're an Ozzy fan?" I said, "Yeah, I love Randy Rhoads." They said, "Do you want to just hop in the van?" I'm like, "Duh." So I hop in the van. So I travel down there with LSD, and then I get to, and that tour was cancelled after two. There were only two shows. This one was in Cardiff, and then there was one other show, and then it got cancelled because Ozzy got divorced or something.
Okay.
So I got to watch the sound check, and there was no Ozzy, so the band played "Diary of a Madman" as an instrumental,
Right.
and it was staggering. And I'm watching from the board, and when they're done, Randy starts walking towards the board with, I guess, the tour manager. And I'm like, I got it. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I walked over and said, "Hey, man, my name's Nick. I'm a huge fan." I said, "John Thomas says, hey." He goes, "You're a friend of John's?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, I love that guy." And he goes, "So if you're a friend of John's," he goes, "you've got to be a guitar player." And so we had this conversation for like 5 minutes about guitars and stuff.
Hmm.
He was asking me question after question. How do you meet John? Blah, 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 blah. What do you use? What do you... And I could see that the tour manager getting agitated.
Right.
I think he was probably going to do an interview or something. So I sort of said, "Hey, but it's been a pleasure meeting you, but I've got to meet some friends," which was a complete lie. But the tour manager knew what I was doing. He went, "Thank you." So, I shook Randy's hand. He walked away, and the guys from LSD goes, "Dude, that was really cool." I said, "Well," they said, "Mate, that was amazing. Not that was cool." That's once again the American within me coming out. I said, They said, "Yeah." I said, "No, no, no." They said, "The reason we say it's amazing is you didn't ask him one question. He asked you what you used and why, and that's all the conversation was."
Right.
And I was like, "Shit, you're right. I didn't." He would just wanted to know why do you use that pickup? Why did you put this in front of this? I told
Right.
him about the screaming tree, Big Muff. He's going, "Why'd you do that?" And so that was my Randy moment. So LSD. So it's come full circle. Randy Rhoads, Van Halen, Simon Van Halen, and John Thomas's friend.
I tell you what, you've had some amazing experiences, and it's cool because like if you're hanging out with Eddie, right, and you're shooting the shit with him, do you ever talk to him about I saw you in '78, or did you ever meet him?
No, no,
Huh?
I never felt it. I didn't want to. I in like the quality time we got together
Yeah.
didn't seem appropriate.
Right. Right. Right.
And he
Because
was talking. We were just talking about regular stuff. I was going to go, "Hey, man, back in '99, I told a hotel it was Simon Van Halen." It's like, no, he doesn't need to hear that shit.
but it's a
Like,
great
well,
story.
yeah, it is. And part of me says, and it was like, no, I don't want to spoil the moment by
Right.
fanboying out. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? I was enjoying the moment of just Eddie Van Halen being Eddie Van Halen with me, and no, we weren't even talking about music.
Right.
That's what made it great. Is that you could have a conversation with the guy about, I can't even remember what we were talking about, but it wasn't about Bodywood. I
Right.
just
Right.
wanted to bask in the well, enjoy the moment of seeing of Edward, of having a conversation with Edward about something he was genuinely passionate about,
Right. Right.
because he
Man.
had that effect on you as well.
Right, right. He's such an amazing guy and such an amazing history. You've been able to be close to all these guys like George Lynch, who's been on the show as well, and Randy, and all these folks and all this different stuff that you experienced, in your music career. I mean, can you imagine like from the very beginning when you saw Van Halen to be at that point with Van Halen? That's a huge like full circle thing there for you.
Yeah, well, I'm just looking at, I'm looking at the guitar. I'm looking at this guitar which no one else has, and the pickup. It's like, yeah, I've been there's a saying that says you've got to be in, the right place, the right time.
Hmm.
And my caveat is, yeah, that's only half the story. You've got to be in enough places, enough times that when the right time comes, you're actually there, and then you've got to be prepared to act on it, which is the whole Simon Van Halen thing. I'm
Right,
sure I wasn't the only person who knew what hotel they were in. I was the only one stupid enough to put on a really bad American accent and say, "Hey, my name's Simon Van Halen."
right. But
And
it's
I heard something great from Nita Strauss, who I love dearly.
yeah,
She said, the thing you have to, she goes, "My biggest advice to anyone who wants to make it in the industry, when someone asks you something that could lead to something, say yes immediately and then worry about how you're going to do it after you've said yes. Never say no because they might never ask you again. So yeah, it's I've been blessed, and I can't, and I wouldn't. Do I have a lot of money? Hell no. I think, I walk in the bank and they point and laugh, but I don't care because
Right.
I I can't put a price on some of the stuff I've been lucky enough to experience.
Right. Right.
Like I've got amazing Ingve Malmsteen stories, who is a really funny, dry guy, but not, some people have this misinterpretation that he's this arrogant ass. He's one of the funniest people I know, man. He makes me laugh hard. But I've just been blessed to have, I've spent time with some of my heroes. I got to know Holdsworth, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, I can't put a price on that. I've got friends who are happily retired, have a house in Portugal and 3 cars, and they're miserable sons of bitches because they hated the 45 years it took them to earn that.
Yeah. Totally. I understand that. That's totally, what you talk about retired or what? Somebody said recently, somebody said, retired or what?
But no, I'm going to do this is what I would do. I'd be doing this anyway.
I know. That's what I'm saying. Like somebody
Yeah.
said, what are you going to do? Retire? This is what I would do if I was retired.
Yeah. Which is why, people said, why doesn't Jim sell the company? It's like, because it's his life. It's his lifeblood,
Right. Oh, of course, man. It's crazy.
It's his legacy. And that's what, it goes back to, that's why the EVH brand has so much integrity to me, because Edward was so passionately involved in every single aspect of it. Didn't cut any corners.
But I guess he really enjoyed every aspect of being involved in every aspect of it.
I think the biggest thing, the nicest thing, one of the coolest thing is that he had this little saying. They had a tagline, "This is what I use," and
Right.
he made them cross out "I" and put "we." That sums up Edward Van Halen.
Right. 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 That's amazing,
This
man.
is what we collectively use. Because
Right.
I love, that's why Steve's book Tone Chaser. I mean, that such a great term that sums up Edward in all of these guys are tone chasers. George Lynch is a tone chaser. Darrell was a tone chaser. You think you've got it, and then it's 2 weeks later. It's like, nah, I can. It's like, I think it's a healthy but expensive addiction.
That is true, and you're helping deal it out up there at Sweetwater. I have such a bill there all the time. It's like I'm never out of my debt, but I don't care.
It's funny that nothing makes me smile more than someone goes. I had a guy say to me over the weekend. He said, "I just wanted to say thank you for all the videos you've made. I've bought a lot of stuff, and by the way, my wife hates you."
Exactly.
And then the woman behind me goes, "No, I don't."
Right. I'll say this too, that you just mentioned Malmsteen, because I met Ingve a couple of times, and I have a good friend down in Florida where he shops all the time. And I've always had a good experience with him. One of them was at Marshall's booth one year at the NAMM show.
Ingve makes me laugh really, really hard. But he's not the guy. It's his way or the highway.
Right.
It's his brand. So if someone says, "Why don't we do this?" and he doesn't want to do it, he'll say no.
Right.
Some people will mistake someone saying, "No, I don't want to do that," with, "Oh, he's an ass." Not necessarily.
Right. Right. Well, it's just like Edward with his brand. He wants to make sure that it hits all the marks for him. Right.
Yeah. So, I've been very fortunate that, my relationship, I value my relationship with Ingve. And he also, a lot of people don't understand his humor.
I do. I love it. I think it's hilarious.
He's extremely dry. Like, he can recite he knows Life of Brian and the Holy Grail. He knows it. He knows he knows that stuff verbatim. He's very English, and I think that's part of the reason we get on. And he's got some funny lines.
Yeah.
He's just funny. His sarcasm is brutal.
I mean, I've always got him, and I to tell you a story. When I went to Nam, one of the first times I went to Nam, I'm walking behind him. He's in the line, right, and somebody's asking him about the scalloping because that's all new, right, to
Right.
people. And he just whips the guitar out his case in the line and just he's like letting them play it, and all this stuff that I've heard over the years. It's like, not that's not the guy I met.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's funny, that's the beauty of the internet as well. Everyone has bad days.
Sure.
Everyone has a bad day. I'm sure Jesus Christ had bad days.
Hmm.
But it's some people, but people don't take that into context or take it out of context. This go blah 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 blah. But he recently did a playthrough, and his tech was one of his guitars went out of tune. And he turns to his tech and straight faced, it's on video, so we can't put it, but he just went, "Hey, how long is it going to be before?" How did he put it? He goes, "How long is it going to take you to tune that guitar?" He goes, "But he goes, at the rate you're going, my clothes will be back in fashion by the time it's in tune again." Something like that. It was freaking great, and it was off the cuff,
Wow.
and really, really fast.
Right, right, right. It's so funny.
Lynch is cut from the same cloth as well.
Yeah, he's got sarcasm that's funny too. I mean, there's some great stuff in the interview I did with him where he's talking about joining a Lenny Kravitz tribute band because he'll make more money.
My favorite George story was, and it's in my wallet still, was just before COVID. They played Lynch Mob was playing, like they played a show at Pierre's,
Okay.
and George called me. And he goes, "Hey Nick, you're still at Sweetwater, right?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Dude, I've just flown in." He goes, "I forgot my guitar strap and my strap, and I need strap locks." I said, "So tell me what you want, and I'll bring it down." I was going to come to Soundcheck anyway. So he told me what the strap he wanted, not just the brand of strap locks, but what color. We got all that sorted. I sent him pictures, and then I took the stuff down to Soundcheck,
Hmm.
and the people here, like George had done clinics at Sweetwater and stuff.
Hmm.
So the guy for the manager of the store said, "Just give it to George as a gift."
Right.
Well, that's really cool. So that's the least we can do. He's done great stuff. There's pictures of him on the wall and stuff. So I take George the stuff down. His text put it. He goes, "Nick," he goes, "I can't thank you enough." He goes, "How much do I owe you?" I said, "George, it's $0.00 plus tax." He goes, "Cool. Let me give you a card." And he pulls his wallet out. I'm going, "No, George, what part of $0.00 plus tax do you not get?" He goes, "No, I'm going to give you a card." And he gives me a credit card, and I look at it, and it's a double, it's his AARP card with George Lynch embossed on it. It was one they'd sent him to try and get him to. I said, "You realize you're going to keep this?" He goes, "No, consider that a gift as a thank you for the."
Wow.
And I still tell the story, and I still carry it with all that. People go, "No way!" I'm going, "Here's the card."
That's awesome.
I love George, funny guy.
He is a funny guy, man. I think I really want to thank you for coming on and sharing all these stories and all this with me, man. It's always been my thing to I've loved Ed since I was a kid. He's the whole reason I'm here, like I said, and in any way that I can pay him back, by pushing his legacy out there for the rest of all the time that YouTube will be around. I'm hoping that we can do that.
And as an Ed fan, thank you for doing what you're doing. The same way. I think telling the stories and keeping, because everyone has an Ed story. Everyone who's met Ed's got a great story.
Right.
So you're going to be a busy man.
I'm going to go until there's no more stories.
So you better live another 150 years.
Right. Or at least
You
till I'm
still,
gone.
because you still won't be done.
Well, I'm hoping that one day this stuff will end up with some kid that wants to know more about this guy.
And that to me is people ask me why I teach. It's like the joy I get from when someone has a penny drop moment, be it about, "Oh, I showed some kid how Ed did something today," just a little bit of eruption,
Hmm.
and he got it.
Right.
That meant the world to me because I played forward something that I probably got wrong, but it was close enough for rock and roll.
Right. Right. And you like when I was taught by my favorite teacher, my teacher that it really did everything for me. It was so transformative for me to have somebody to hang out with, to play with, and to be inspired by as well.
If I can help someone 1% in their journey, I'm a happy guy. So thanks for taking the time, man. I
Well,
appreciate
thank
it.
you for doing that, and I really appreciate it. And it's great to meet you online, and I will probably see if you're going to be at NAM. You're going to be at NAM.
I'm not sure yet, but if I am, let's make sure our paths cross in person because that
I
would be
will.
fantastic.
If I see you, I'll flag you down and we'll talk. Thank you, Nick.
My pleasure, sir. My pleasure.
Have a great one. Thank you so much.